The crackle and pop of the burning logs filled the small cabin, a comforting counterpoint to the growing moan of the wind outside. David sat on the worn rug before the hearth, his arm a warm weight around Lily's shoulders. Her head, heavy with sleepiness, rested against his side. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the faint freckles on her nose and making her hair, the color of autumn leaves, glow. "Tell me another one, Papa," she mumbled, her voice muffled by his sweater. He smiled, a gentle crinkle at the corners of his eyes. "Another one? You'll be dreaming of grumpy bears and clever foxes all night." "I like them," she insisted, pushing herself up slightly to look at him, her eyes wide and earnest. "The one where the fox outsmarted the wolf, but then shared his berries anyway." David chuckled, stroking her hair. All right. This one is about a little robin who built his nest right in the middle of a big, tall oak tree, even though all the other birds said it was too windy there." He lowered his voice, making it raspy for the wind's part, then bright and chirpy for the robin. Lily giggled, captivated, her earlier weariness forgotten in the magic of his storytelling. Outside, the wind began to truly awaken. It started as a low, mournful sigh, then gathered strength, rising to a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very timbers of the cabin. A sudden, sharp gust rattled the window panes, making Lily jump. She instinctively pressed closer to David, her small hand gripping his shirt. "It's just the wind, little one," he reassured her, tightening his embrace. "She's just singing a loud song tonight." "It sounds like a wolf," Lily whispered, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked glass. The world beyond was dissolving into a blurred canvas of gray and darker gray, illuminated only by the occasional flash of distant lightning, too far away to bring thunder yet. "A very noisy wolf," David agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But our cabin is strong. It keeps us safe and warm." He unwrapped his arm from her, moving towards the small, sturdy table in the corner. "How about we make some dinner? My tummy says it's time for some creative concoctions." Lily's shyness, always present initially, dissolved quickly when it came to helping her father. "Can I draw while you cook, Papa?" she asked, already reaching for her worn sketchbook and a stub of charcoal from the shelf. "Of course," he said, pulling out a battered pot. "Draw me the bravest robin in the tallest oak tree." As David began to chop vegetables with practiced efficiency, the cabin filled with the comforting smells of onion and garlic. The storm outside escalated its symphony. The wind now howled like a truly enraged beast, tearing at the trees, its mournful cries punctuated by the sharp crack of branches snapping in the distance. Rain lashed against the roof and walls in relentless sheets, sounding like 1,000 tiny hammers. The cabin, once a haven of quiet warmth, now felt like a small boat tossed on a tempestuous sea, though its sturdy construction held firm. Lily, oblivious to the storm's growing fury, was deeply engrossed in her drawing. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, as she meticulously shaded the imagined leaves of her oak tree. The rhythm of David's chopping, the scent of the cooking stew, and the muted roar of the storm outside created a strange but comforting cocoon. He glanced at her, a profound sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. This was their life, simple and challenging, but filled with a quiet, enduring love that defied the chaos of the world beyond their four walls. He stirred the stew, the rich aroma mingling with the faint smell of wood smoke. The storm raged, but inside they were safe, connected by the warmth of the fire, the promise of dinner, and the unspoken understanding between a father and his daughter. The wind howled, a mournful lament around their small cabin, but inside, the fire crackled a cheerful counterpoint. David, carefully carving a small wooden bird, smiled as Lily, nestled beside him on the worn rug, hummed a tuneless lullaby to her favorite tattered teddy bear. Rain lashed against the window panes, blurring the already dim evening light, yet the cabin felt like a bastion of warmth and peace. He admired the intricate grain of the pine in his hands, each cut deliberate, a small act of creation in the quiet of their world. Suddenly, a sound ripped through the storm's din, a deafening crash that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the few ceramic plates on the shelf. It wasn't thunder, not a natural roar, but something metallic, splintering, and utterly alien to the familiar sounds of their woods. The cabin lights flickered, plunged into momentary darkness, then sputtered back to life, casting dancing shadows. Lily gasped, dropping Teddy with a thump. Her wide, hazel eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were now pools of fear. "Dad, what was that?" Her voice was a shaky whisper. David's hand, still clutching the half-carved bird, tightened. He'd heard many things in these woods: falling trees, startled deer, the occasional distant bear, but never anything like this. It sounded catastrophic. He looked at Lily, her small face pale in the firelight. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her it was nothing, but the raw clang and shatter of the impact still echoed in his ears, refusing to be dismissed. "I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted, his brow furrowed in concern. He placed the carving tool down with a soft click. "It came from the north, deep in the woods." The thought of something unknown, potentially dangerous, so close to their home, sent a chill colder than the night air through him. Lily's lower lip trembled. "Are you going to go look?" It wasn't a question of curiosity, but of dread. David hesitated. The sensible thing was to stay put, to weather the storm and wait for morning. But the sound had been too violent, too specific. His mind conjured images of downed power lines, a stranded motorist. Something desperate. He couldn't just ignore it. "I have to, honey, just in case someone needs help." He stood, grabbing his old waterproof jacket from the peg by the door. "I'll be quick. Stay inside. Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone but me, okay?" Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on him, a silent plea for him not to go. "Be careful, Dad." He knelt, giving her a quick, firm hug. He could feel her small heart thrumming against his chest. "Always. Keep the fire stoked. I'll be back before you know it." He tried to infuse his voice with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. With a final, reassuring squeeze, David pulled on his worn boots and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The wind immediately snatched at his jacket, plastering his hair to his forehead. Rain instantly plastered his face, icy and relentless. He glanced back at Lily, a tiny silhouette framed in the warm glow of the doorway, her face a pale oval of worry. He offered a quick, hopeful smile, then stepped out into the tempest. The door clicked shut behind him, plunging Lily into a silence that felt suddenly immense, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. She ran to the window, pressing her nose against the cold glass. She could just make out David's figure, a dark shape against the even darker backdrop of the forest, already struggling against the gale. The beam of his flashlight cut a weak, wavering path through the downpour as he disappeared into the thrashing trees, swallowed by the howling darkness. Lily hugged Teddy tighter, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The persistent drizzle had finally surrendered to a full-blown downpour, each drop hammering the forest canopy with a relentless rhythm. David, already soaked to the bone from checking his traps, squinted through the curtain of rain. A flicker of something unnatural, a metallic glint amidst the deep greens and browns, caught his eye. It was off the faint game trail he usually followed, deeper into the thicket. Curiosity, a trait honed by years of living off the land, tugged at him. Pushing through a dense curtain of dripping rhododendrons, he stopped dead. What lay before him was a mangled wreck of a vehicle, an expensive-looking sedan, crumpled like a discarded toy. Its front end was accordioned against a massive oak, the windshield, a spiderweb of cracks, and one door hung open at an impossible angle. Fresh mud splattered its once gleaming surface. A shiver, colder than the rain, traced its way down David's spine. This wasn't just abandoned, this was a recent catastrophe. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. A faint whimper, almost swallowed by the storm's roar, reached him. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a gravelly rumble against the wind. "Is anyone in there?" Another soft sound, a choked sob, answered him. Peering into the shadowy interior, David's eyes adjusted to the gloom. A figure, slumped against the passenger door, was barely visible. He pushed the driver's side door open further, wincing at the groan of tortured metal. "Miss," he asked gently, his heart thumping, "are you all right?" The woman stirred, her head lifting slowly. Her eyes, wide and luminous even in the dim light, met his. Fear, raw and palpable, swirled within their depths. A strand of dark, wet hair clung to her pale forehead. There was a cut above her eyebrow, a thin, crimson line stark against her skin, and her elegant dress was torn and muddied. I think so, she whispered, her voice reedy and thin. My leg, it hurts. David assessed the situation quickly. The car was a write-off, and she looked shaken to her core, potentially injured worse than she let on. He needed to get her out. All right, miss, he said, his tone firm but reassuring. I'm going to help you. Can you tell me your name? Isabella, she managed, a slight tremor in her voice. Isabella Beaumont. Okay, Miss Beaumont. My name's David. We need to get you out of this car. Can you try to push yourself up a little? He leaned in, his strong hands ready to support her. The air inside the wrecked vehicle was thick, with the smell of gasoline and something acrid, a scent he didn't like. With careful, agonizing slowness, Isabella shifted, wincing sharply. David braced her, his arm a steady anchor around her back. He guided her through the twisted wreckage of the doorframe, mindful of her injured leg. Each movement was a testament to his strength and her quiet endurance. Finally, she was free, swaying slightly, leaning heavily against him. The rain was still pouring, soaking them both instantly. Isabella shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Her fine clothes offered little protection against the chill. He knew, instinctively, that leaving her out here was not an option. His cabin wasn't far, a sturdy shelter against the elements, and he had basic supplies for injuries. We can't stay here, David stated, his gaze sweeping the desolate woods. It's too cold, and you need to get that leg looked at. My cabin's about a 20-minute walk, maybe less if we go slow. Can you manage that? Isabella looked up at him, her eyes still clouded with shock, but with a flicker of gratitude. I think I have to, don't I? She said, a faint, almost imperceptible attempt at a smile touching her lips. David nodded, already planning the safest route. Yes, Miss Beaumont. You do. He gently guided her arm around his shoulders, offering his side as a crutch. Just lean on me. We'll take it slow. The thought of Lily, safe and warm at home, spurred him on. He wouldn't leave anyone, especially a woman in such distress, to the mercy of the storm. The scent of pine and wood smoke enveloped them, as David guided Isabella through the cabin door. Lily, who had been peering from behind David's leg, quickly retreated further into the shadows of the living room. Isabella offered a gentle, reassuring smile, her eyes sparkling even in the dim light. It's all right, Lilybug, David said softly, ruffling his daughter's hair. This is Isabella. She just needs a warm place to rest. He motioned towards the worn but comfortable armchair by the stone fireplace, where a small fire now crackled merrily. Isabella winced slightly as she sat, her hand instinctively going to her side. David knelt beside her, his brow furrowed with concern. Let's get you properly settled, he murmured, then turned to Lily. Sweetheart, could you fetch the thickest blanket from the chest at the foot of my bed? And maybe the extra pillow? Lily, still a little hesitant, nodded silently. Her eyes, wide and curious, darted towards Isabella before she scampered off. Isabella watched her go, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She's a very sweet child, she said, her voice a little softer now that the immediate urgency had passed. David nodded, already examining the cut on Isabella's forearm. It was a clean slice, but deep enough to require more than just a quick wipe. She's got a good heart, he agreed, pulling a small, well-worn first-aid kit from a shelf above the mantel. He carefully cleaned the wound with antiseptic, Isabella only flinching slightly. The cabin's quiet hum of the fire and the gentle swish of the wind outside filled the silence. Lily soon returned, dragging a heavy, crocheted blanket patterned with forest animals, and a plump feather pillow. Her shyness still clung to her, but a spark of helpfulness now shone in her eyes. She offered the pillow to Isabella, who accepted it with a grateful smile. Thank you, Lily, Isabella said, her voice warm. This looks wonderfully cozy. Lily's cheeks flushed, but she seemed to relax a fraction. She then helped David drape the heavy blanket over Isabella's shoulders, making sure it was tucked snugly around her. The warmth of the fire and the soft embrace of the blanket seemed to ease some of Isabella's tension. Much better, Isabella sighed, leaning back into the cushions. She looked at David, then at Lily, a genuine appreciation in her gaze. You've both been incredibly kind. I was so worried I'd be stuck out there all night. She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought. I was on my way to an important meeting, a significant one actually. Missing it? Well, it causes quite a ripple. David looked at her, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded, acknowledging her words without probing. He knew what it was like for things to be important, though his important usually involved ensuring his daughter had enough to eat or a warm pair of boots. For a brief moment, the quiet comfort of the cabin was punctuated by the unspoken chasm between their worlds, a chasm that Isabella's words had momentarily illuminated. Lily, sensing a shift in the mood, simply snuggled closer to her father, her gaze fixed on Isabella. The first crash of thunder felt like the sky itself had ripped open, a prelude to the maelstrom that descended upon the small cabin. Rain hammered against the windows, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out all other sounds. David had just finished securing the last shutter when the wind picked up, howling like a banshee, making the old structure creak and groan. For 2 days, the world outside was a swirling, gray blur of furious water and tearing branches. Inside, a different kind of atmosphere settled. The initial apprehension gave way to a quiet, unexpected camaraderie. Lily, usually bubbling with energy, found comfort curled on the rug by the crackling fireplace, sketching fantastical creatures in her worn notebook. David, ever vigilant, kept the fire stoked in the cabin as cozy as possible, his eyes frequently darting to Isabella, who sat in an armchair, a book open but unread in her lap, watching Lily with a gentle smile. "She's quite the storyteller," David remarked one afternoon, noticing Isabella's gaze. Even when she was tiny, she'd invent elaborate tales about her toys. Once, she convinced her daycare teacher that her teddy bear, Barnaby, had learned to fly by eating a special kind of blueberry. He chuckled, a warm rumbling sound that filled the small space. The teacher actually tried to find these flying blueberries in the forest. Isabella laughed, a soft, melodious sound that brought a hint of light into the dim cabin. "That sounds exactly like something a child would invent. My own childhood was a little less imaginative, perhaps, more structured." She paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "But I always admired those who could create worlds out of thin air." The storm outside intensified, a fresh gust rattling the windows. David took the opportunity to share more anecdotes about Lily, recalling her early attempts at baking that resulted in a biscuit shaped like a bewildered owl, or the time she insisted on giving a stray squirrel a tiny knitted hat. Each story painted a vivid picture of Lily's spirit, and Isabella listened intently, her initial reserve slowly melting away. Later that evening, as the wind howled its loudest, Isabella started to share snippets of her own life. She spoke of bustling city streets, towering buildings that scraped the clouds, and the dizzying pace of a life far removed from the quiet wilderness. She described evenings at the opera, the intricate architecture of ancient museums, and the vibrant chaos of a world David and Lily had only seen in pictures. Lily, captivated by the descriptions, put down her crayons, her eyes wide. "Do they have squirrels in the city?" Lily asked, her voice a whisper. Isabella smiled. "Oh yes, plenty. They're very bold, too. Sometimes they'll even try to snatch crumbs right off your park bench." David retrieved a well-worn deck of cards, and soon the cabin was filled with the rhythmic shuffling and the quiet exclamations of a card game. They played Go Fish, then a surprisingly competitive round of Old Maid, Isabella proving to be a shrewd opponent, much to Lily's delight. Laughter echoed through the cabin, a stark contrast to the tempest raging beyond its walls. For 2 days, the outside world ceased to exist. There was only the cabin, the warmth of the fire, and the unexpected burgeoning connection between 3 disparate souls. A sliver of golden light, tentative yet resolute, pierced through the bruised purple clouds. It painted a shimmering path across the still damp forest, illuminating droplets clinging to pine needles like scattered diamonds. David, watching from the kitchen window, felt a release he hadn't realized he was holding. The relentless drumming of rain, which had been the soundtrack to their unexpected cohabitation, was finally fading into a gentle drip. He turned to see Isabella, stirring a cup of instant coffee, her elegant posture somehow unchanged by the rustic surroundings. The faint line between her brows, a constant during the storm, seemed to soften as she glanced outside. "The sun returns," she murmured, a quiet relief in her voice. David nodded, the words catching in his throat. The storm's end meant the end of this peculiar interlude. He knew, with a certainty that pulled at something within him, that he needed to get her back to her life. Her important life. That high-stakes meeting she'd mentioned, the one that had been the reason for her ill-fated drive. His truck, despite its age, was reliable, and the main road, though likely rough, would be passable soon. He just had to make sure Lily was safe at Mrs. Henderson's, and then he'd drive Isabella back to the world she belonged to. Lily, oblivious to the undercurrents, skipped into the kitchen, her eyes wide with wonder at the returning light. "Papa, the sun is back. Can we go outside?" "Soon, sweet pea." David smiled, ruffling her hair. "After breakfast, and after we make sure everything's okay out there." He caught Isabella's gaze, a silent acknowledgment passing between them. Breakfast was a quiet affair, filled with the comforting sounds of frying eggs and the gentle clinking of cutlery. Lily recounted a dream about talking squirrels, her voice a bright counterpoint to the unspoken understanding that hung in the air. Isabella listened patiently, offering gentle encouragement, a subtle shift in her reserved demeanor making her seem more approachable, less like the person who'd been plucked from a world of boardrooms and schedules. David watched her, noticing the way the sunlight caught the subtle highlights in her hair, the thoughtful curve of her lips as she sipped her coffee. He realized how accustomed he'd become to her presence, to the quiet grace she brought to his humble home. It wasn't just the storm that had held them captive. It was a strange, temporary bubble of shared vulnerability. And now, that bubble was about to burst. He pushed his plate away, the decision firm in his mind. "As soon as the roads are clear enough," he began, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "I'll take you back, Isabella, to wherever you need to be." Isabella met his gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Thank you, David," she said softly, the simple words carrying a weight that transcended mere gratitude. The end of their unexpected time together, while inevitable, suddenly felt very real. The familiar rumble of David's old Ford pickup was a comforting counterpoint to the morning's crisp air. Isabella sat beside him, the early light catching the silver threads in her hair as they drove away from the farmhouse. The fields, still damp with dew, stretched out on either side, painted in hues of emerald and gold. David, usually a man of few words, glanced at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He was used to the quiet hum of his own thoughts, but Isabella's presence, even in silence, had brought a different kind of warmth to his world these past few days. The nearest town, with its single gas station and an even smaller car rental office, was a 40-minute drive. Along the way, Isabella spoke of her journey, the unexpected storm, and the sheer relief she'd felt when David had appeared. It was like something out of a storybook, she mused, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. A knight in shining armor, or rather, a kind farmer in a sturdy truck. David chuckled, a rare, full sound. "Just doing what anyone would do." "Not everyone, David?" she corrected, turning to face him. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, held a depth of sincerity that made him momentarily avert his gaze. "Your kindness, your home, the way you cared for me and Lily, it was truly exceptional. I don't think I could ever truly thank you enough." They pulled into the gravel lot of Miller's Auto and Hardware, the only place in a 30-mile radius that offered car rentals. Isabella stepped out, a renewed sense of purpose in her stride. Inside, after a brief conversation with a gruff but efficient man named Earl, she emerged with keys to a modest sedan. The exchange was quick, almost too quick, making the finality of it all settle in David's chest. She walked back to his truck, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Well, that's that. My chariot awaits." She extended her hand, and David took it, his calloused fingers dwarfing hers. "David," she began, her voice softening, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything. You and Lily opened your home to a complete stranger, and you did so with such genuine warmth." He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "It was no trouble, Isabella, really." He found it hard to meet her gaze, the parting feeling heavier than he'd anticipated. He was used to goodbyes, to the cyclical nature of seasons, but this felt different. "You're a good man, David," she said, her thumb tracing a light pattern on the back of his hand before she withdrew it. "And Lily is a very lucky girl to have a father like you." She paused, then added, "I'll never forget your kindness, or Lily's bright spirit." He managed a small smile. "And we won't forget you, Isabella. Safe travels." She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed emotion. "Goodbye, David." With one last, lingering look, she turned and walked towards her rented car. David watched as she started the engine, backed out of the lot, and drove away, disappearing down the long, winding road. The old truck felt suddenly very quiet, the air around him a little colder. He took a deep breath, the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant diesel filling his lungs, and turned his truck back towards the farm, a new kind of quiet settling in for the drive home. A full week had passed since the storm, a week filled with the comforting rhythm of their quiet lives. David had spent his days mending fences, teaching Lily how to identify different bird calls, and preparing for the first chill of autumn. Lily, meanwhile, had filled the cabin with her laughter, her crayon drawings now adorning the rough-hewn walls, depicting everything from flying squirrels to a very friendly-looking bear. The memory of Isabella and the brief, intense interlude of her presence had settled into a warm, almost dreamlike corner of David's mind, a pleasant distraction from the usual solitude. He was in the woodshed, splitting firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe against oak echoing through the crisp morning air. Lily was sitting on the porch steps, meticulously arranging pine cones into an elaborate, imagined village. Suddenly, the distant hum of an engine, too refined for any local vehicle, cut through the natural sounds. Both David and Lily paused, listening. The hum grew into a low purr, then faded as a sleek, dark sedan, a model David only ever saw in magazines, glided to a stop by their rough gravel driveway. A tall, impeccably dressed man, Mr. Henderson, stepped out from the driver's side. He surveyed the cabin and its rustic surroundings with an unreadable expression before moving to open the rear passenger door. David felt a familiar jolt in his chest as Isabella emerged. She looked as elegant and composed as ever, a stark contrast to the wilderness around them, yet she carried a warmth that instantly brightened the gray morning. Her smile, as she spotted them, was genuine and radiant. "Isabella!" Lily shrieked, scrambling off the porch and running towards her. Isabella knelt, catching Lily in a gentle hug. "Hello, sweetheart. Did you miss me?" "Yes!" Lily exclaimed, her eyes wide with delight. "Are you staying?" David, wiping sawdust from his hands on his jeans, approached them, a mixture of surprise and pleasure blooming in his chest. "Isabella, this is unexpected. It's good to see you." "David," she said, rising and meeting his gaze, her smile softening, "it's good to see you too. And thank you for not calling the authorities to report my unscheduled return." A light, playful glint entered her eyes. Mr. Henderson, meanwhile, had opened the trunk and retrieved a large, intricately wrapped gift for Lily, which instantly captivated the little girl. Isabella then turned back to David, her expression becoming more serious, though still kind. In her hand, she held a thick, pristine white envelope. His name was printed on it in elegant script. "I know this is sudden," she began, her voice low, "but I wanted to deliver this in person. It's for you, David." She extended the envelope. David took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The paper felt substantial, important. He turned it over, feeling its unexpected weight. The lack of a return address, coupled with its formal presentation, gave him a peculiar sense of unease mixed with curiosity. He glanced at Isabella, whose eyes held a depth he couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a little rougher than he intended, the silence suddenly amplifying the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Isabella simply smiled, a knowing, almost mischievous glint in her eyes. "It's a surprise, David. A thank you, and a new beginning." The familiar scent of damp earth and simmering stew clung to David as he settled into his worn armchair. Lily was already tucked in, her soft snores a comforting rhythm from the next room. He reached for the plain white envelope, its crisp edge, a stark contrast to the rough texture of his calloused thumb. He'd found it tucked beneath a loose brick by the old oak, exactly where Isabella had indicated in her rushed goodbye. A strange apprehension coiled in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't known since the storm itself. He carefully tore open the seal. Inside, 2 pieces of paper lay nestled. The first was a thick, cream-colored check. His eyes widened, scanning the figures. His breath hitched. It was a sum so vast it made his head spin, a number that dwarfed anything he'd ever seen, even in the bank commercials on the old television set. He reread it, certain his tired eyes were playing tricks on him, but the zeros remained stubbornly in place. Beneath the check was a letter, handwritten in an elegant, flowing script. He unfolded it, his hands trembling slightly. Dear David, I hope this letter finds you well, and little Lily thriving. The short time I spent under your roof, though born of necessity, left an indelible mark on my heart. Your kindness, your unwavering generosity, and the warmth you both extended to a complete stranger were a revelation. In a world that often feels cold and transactional, your humanity shone like a beacon. I remember Lily's bright eyes, her boundless imagination, and her quiet curiosity about everything. I remember the tales you spun for her, the way you ensured she always felt safe and loved, even when circumstances were challenging. It struck me then, and it stays with me now, that such a spirit deserves every opportunity to flourish. The enclosed check is not merely a thank you, David. It is an investment in a future I believe you both deserve. I want to ensure Lily's education is secured, from the finest schools to whatever higher learning she might choose. Beyond that, I wish for you both to have a home that offers more than just shelter. A place of comfort, security, and beauty built specifically for you. A place where Lily can have a proper room, where you can both stretch out without the constant worry of leaky roofs or drafty windows. Please, do not refuse this. It is a small gesture from a heart deeply touched. Your help during the storm was invaluable, but more than that, your compassion was a gift I will never forget. Consider it an act of friendship, a desire to see good people prosper. With deepest gratitude and warmest wishes, Isabella. David read the letter twice, then a third time, each word sinking deeper into his soul. His throat tightened, a lump forming that made it hard to swallow. He remembered Isabella's quiet observations, the way her gaze had lingered on Lily's worn shoes, on the threadbare blanket, on the flickering candlelight during their simple dinners. He hadn't thought much of it then, attributing it to the curiosity of someone thrust into an unfamiliar world. Now, he understood. She had seen beyond the storm, into the quiet struggles of their everyday lives. He closed his eyes, the image of a new house forming in his mind. Not a mansion, not anything ostentatious, but a sturdy home, with a warm kitchen, a proper bathroom, and a bright, sunlit room for Lily, perhaps with a window seat where she could read her stories. He saw her attending school, not just the village one, but somewhere she could truly blossom, her mind alight with new knowledge. He saw himself, finally able to provide more than just the basics, able to truly build a stable foundation for their small, precious family. A tear traced a path down his cheek, tasting of salt and unshed emotion. It was more than money. It was freedom, hope, a chance at a life he'd only dared to dream of in his quietest moments. Isabella, a woman he'd known for only a few days, had seen them, truly seen them, and offered a lifeline he never expected. His heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude, a silent promise forming in his mind. He would make her proud. He would build that future for Lily, a future Isabella had so generously unlocked.